Another story that really tipped off my BS meter was one that came out about a year or two ago, just saying that some scientists had discovered that 90% of all the large fishes in the sea had been extinct. But how the hell do they know that? Did he go count them? Did they know how many there were before? Do they know how many there are now? You know, there were just so many things wrong with it, but the AP had picked this thing up verbatim and just ran it. And it's one of those things where, from talking to some of the media guys, it's plausible deniability. They can run this stuff because it's not their fault, they're not their responsibility, rather, to get this right. They can say, well, this Yahoo over here says the following, and run it, and then it'll just go. But it's not their fault if he's wrong. I don't know if that makes any sense or not. But it's basically plausible deniability for them. One of the other things that I see floating around out there is the media eats itself, or more to the point, copies itself like crazy. We've been noticing this on FARK for a long time. It started around 2000 or so when one of the DJs that was reading FARK told me that Clear Channel had circulated a memo to all of its DJs telling them to go to FARK to get all their news. It's been a long damn time since I met a radio guy that hadn't heard of what FARK was and used it on a regular basis. That's great as far as I'm concerned. It's a lot of fun. But some interesting patterns started showing up as FARK grew in popularity, where you could see a link that would get posted on FARK that would come through, and we would stick it up, out of somebody's, local newspaper or whatever, and then overnight it would just explode, show up everywhere in most of the radio stations, in most cases the next day, because I'm not getting up early enough for the East Coast guys to use us as material. And then over the next few days, then you get CNN on top of it, and then eventually you'd see it would end with either NPR running an article on it or showing up on the Daily Show where they actually go interview the guys. Now, the first time I told that to somebody, people were like, oh, come on, there's no way in hell. Well, I at the time I had no evidence, so I had to say, well, okay, fine, it's just what I think is going on. But after a while, we started doing fake stories to see where they would go, to give us some idea of what kind of impact we would have. Oh, absolutely, for science. Absolutely the name of science. It was all to find out what was happening. And I don't remember what the first one was, but we ended up hooking up with a bunch of guys who run a little outfit called the Hoosier Gazette. They live in Corydon, Indiana, across the river from Louisville. One of the guys is a teacher at a community college. One of the guys works at UPS hauling crates around all day long. I mean, not the people you would think would be capable of perpetrating, media hoaxes, but these guys were able to do it with frightening regularity. And about the fourth or fifth time the media outlets got burned, they finally, just decided to go ahead and never print anything these guys did. Some of their stories where there was an article about a kid named, I don't remember what the guy's name was, it was like Jason Smith or something like that, so that supposedly got picked up by Purdue on a basketball scholarship. That there was an administrative error that occurred, and they ended up getting, instead of a 6'6" shooting guard, they ended up with a 5'6" computer science major instead, who wasn't willing to release the scholarship because he said he couldn't afford to go to school otherwise. That incidentally ended up getting picked up by Jim Rome's radio show, and he actually broke his show as a breaking news. Then throughout the course of the hour of his show, he said, well, we're going to check on this one. And then in the middle of it there, well, this may not appear to be true at all. And then by the end of the show, he was telling everybody that, oh, yeah, we knew it all along. We were just seeing if anybody was paying attention, which I didn't hear the show, but people who did told me there's no way in hell that was the case. Another one that they did was they did one where there's a movie theater manager that dressed up as Satan for the premiere of Jesus Christ Chainsaw Massacre. What was the real name of that movie? The Passion, whatever that was. Yeah, I see. Certain things have kind of like erased themselves from my mind. That's all I can think of when I see that movie is Jesus Christ Chainsaw Massacre, because it's essentially what it is. Yeah, just about. That was that one, and there were a few others basically, but. So we ended up, once the Hoosier Gazette ended up being found out, and no one was ever going to buy a story from them again, I ended up hooking up with a couple other friends of mine. One was Joe, who's one of the guys that runs Zug.com. It's a prank site that's been around forever. I remember reading that a long time ago, back in 1999. One of my favorite pranks that they ever did was they had noticed the fine print on the back of the potato chip bag, when the Olestra one said that it may cause anal bleeding. So they decided to see exactly how many Olestra potato chips you would need to eat in order to incur anal bleeding. Was it common? Was it a rare side effect? And it turned out it took 5 days. The prank's still up on the website if you want to check it out. It is a little disgusting, but they the two guys, it was Joe and then my other friend Brian Doty, who runs a site called Broken News, which occasionally will pop up under the satire heading rather than, because usually satire stuff is pretty obvious. But they got together and they decided that it seemed pretty easy to fake the media. So what if they actually tried? And so they did. They ended up, the first one that they did, they put it together a website, and they actually called it, and I think it's still up. Let's see if I can find it here. They called it, you would think that the moniker WTF TV would tip people off, but you'd be wrong. I don't know if it's still there or not. Yeah, here it is. This is their fake news site. You see 15 fans, 4 police officers injured after a brawl with Kenny Rogers' bodyguard. This entire website is fake. This whole thing. They did it based on around a city called Hazleton. They made fake ads. There were actually other fake articles, current weather conditions. And the reason that this worked, one of the reasons this worked, was because, I don't know if you probably have noticed that of all of the other local TV news sites out there, they all pretty much have the exact same look and feel. Well, there's a reason for that. It's because the same company does them all. I forget the name of them, but they run like 95 to 100 different television websites around the country, and in some cases different affiliates in the same market. Where they'll be running the CBS and the ABC affiliate at the same time. And the pages look almost exactly the same. I attended a presentation with these guys where they try to say, what? They're really different. Anybody can tell. No, they can't. As evidenced by this. And then the second one they did was actually one of my favorites, was the one where they had announced that California, to combat obesity, had decided to start sterilizing fat people. And they wrote it up as a medical journal article. I actually checked earlier and it's down, but that sucker went out everywhere. And they've got a little track, basically. The Wall Street Journal wrote an editorial against it, and all kinds of stuff. These things went around. Now, what actually all of these things have in common, though, these successful media hoaxes have in common, there's a few things. One, the stuff that Doty and Joe did here is because it looks like it's real. The second thing that they all have in common, is that they use real people's names and real places. And another, speaking of one, the last one the Hoosier Gazette did that got out of the gate was the one where they had an Indiana congressman file a bill to change the numbering for I-69 to a more moral number. And that shut their office down for a week. With people, but interestingly, they talked to the staffer after it was all over, and he said he was shocked at how many people were actually in favor of it. So at any rate, but and the reason that they used that it was successful because of using real names of people, places, and things is because the real regular media does do research on these stories, and what they do is they find the names of the people involved and they Google them. Oh, this person exists. Great. Okay, are they at this university? Yep, sure are. All right, run it. And that's it, honest to God. And that's why this stuff works. And Doty's basically, his whole argument against doing for doing this in every single case is trying to point out the fact that the media doesn't do any fact-checking at all. In fact, I've done probably 50 to 100 newspaper and magazine ads, and only once have I been called by a fact-checker to double-check to make sure that what they wrote down was correct. Only once. So that kind of exposes some interesting things about the media. Basically, what they're doing is you have a whole bunch of people that are sitting around that need to produce stuff. They've got to write articles about something, and if there's nothing to do, they got to go find it one way or the other. And in that kind of an environment where you just can't sit around and wait for something to happen, you have to make stuff, and it's a lot easier in a day when you don't feel like going out to just basically hit Fark, run down the site, see what seems to be getting a lot of traffic, and then call those people. And that isn't the only thing that they do. I mean, basically, they also sit on top of AP news feeds and basically copy those verbatim as well. Apparently, there's been several lawsuits between the Associated Press and CNN about this, because CNN apparently is somewhat guilty of it too. They tell me. I don't know. I haven't done no research on this myself. But it's one of those things where you would think that there would be a little more to it than that, but in general, there's not. A good example of stories that will continue to copy themselves are the shark attacks that actually we're just about into shark attack season now. I don't know if you guys are aware of that or not, but any day now there should be one. And then for the next couple months, anytime a shark shows up on a beach, it's going to end up being in the newspaper. For a while there, they were doing old people driving into farmers markets. For some reason, there was a real rush on those. My suspicion on that, by the way, too, the farmers market thing, anyways, is that I think it happens a lot. I think that's why it started showing up. The reason that they started publicizing it all the time, though, is because for whatever reason there was this groundswell of people focusing on these incidents occurring. Probably what I call the Florida effect, where certain articles like, say, shark attacks and senior citizens driving into farmers market tend to have a little more play than they would maybe outside of that state. But one of the more annoying examples of that kind of thing is plane crashes. I don't know if anybody here's got a Total-Fark account or not, but on Total-Fark you can see the news as they come in, and generally when anything big happens, you know, because 100 news flash articles get submitted on the same thing immediately. One of the more annoying things for me about the plane crashes is that since 9/11, anytime any plane of any size crashes anywhere, it's a big deal. Everybody gets really, really excited about it. News flashes come in, like some prop plane crashed in the middle of the field out in Iowa somewhere. And that's one of those things that the media hasn't gotten over yet. They're still kind of fixated on that for some reason. But it turns out that although journalists aren't necessarily taught that there are certain types of stories that you can always go to, there's this kind of this understanding amongst all of them that there are certain stories that will always get play. Like the human interest stories, like around Christmas time, where you got the family that had the house burned down, that always flies. Or, you know, let's say the small child in your community that may be raising money for cancer by selling toys at the hospital or whatever. I mean, every single community has these things, and they cycle back around all the time. And it's interesting that they continue to do this. A lot of people have pointed out that, are claiming that it's because there's this liberal bias in the media. As far as I can tell, with the exception of Fox News, there's not really any political bias per se. I don't see anybody trying real hard to have a liberal bias. But what I do see is a lazy and a stupid bias. And I'll give you an example of that. There was an article that I saw right around the time of the election, which was really interesting, that was flipping back and forth when they were doing the polls, and the polls were getting all kinds of strange results, where right towards the end, some days Kerry was winning, some days Bush was winning, you never could tell. And I started to notice that whenever they were discussing poll numbers, whenever they were talking about Kerry being in the lead, they'd say, he's got a lead of 3 percentage points, and they just kind of drop it as that. Whenever Bush was in the lead, they go, Bush has a lead of 3 percentage points, well within the margin of error. That was always tacked on to the end of it, and I thought, well, that's really kind of bizarre. What, you know, as if the margin of error, which, yeah, okay, the margin of error is plus or minus 3 percentage points, but it's almost never 3. I mean, I don't know if you guys know anything about math and standard deviations, but I mean, the odds of that actually occurring are slim to none. But it was an interesting caveat that kept on getting thrown in that I would see occasionally from some news channels, where anytime there was some bad news out of a particular candidate, with Fox it's obvious because they're not trying to hide it, but with the other ones, there was more. There would be some bad news about a candidate that the newscaster supported, and then they would then finish their story by trying to mitigate the damage, like, it's well within the margin of error, or they don't really need that state, had no chance to win in the first place, or, you know, et cetera, and so on. And I call that the lazy bias, because I don't believe that any of these people were actually trying to do that on purpose. I really don't. I don't think that there are very many media guys out there that are trying to show for their own candidates. I think they go out of their way to not do that, but I think that after a while, some of this just kind of creeps in on its own anyhow. As far as the copying of the articles go, though, there's some really interesting. None of these guys are actually supposed to do this. It's illegal, as it turns out. In fact, I talked to one Farker who works or worked, because she switched jobs for Westwood One Radio out in Los Angeles, and was talking about how they actually had an edict come down from on high. Never even mention any AP article at all, period. If you see it in the AP, find it from some other news source, but don't do it, because there have been so many lawsuits over them using AP articles, because you guys may not be aware, but radio stations are not allowed to read stories on the air without giving proper attribution. They do it. That's part of the reason why clipping services exist, where basically what clipping services are doing is essentially kind of like what we're doing. They take the news, they rewrite it, and then they send it on. That's actually illegal, because news is not something you can actually copyright or trademark. If it actually occurred, then it can be talked about by somebody else. There's an interesting court case before coming up to the Supreme Court, I think. I forget which. My mind's not really good on the details here. Over fantasy baseball. Major League Baseball sold the exclusive rights to fantasy baseball to an outfit. I forget how many millions of dollars they did. And there's been a lawsuit going on saying you can't do that, because you can't sell statistics on sports. Like, they can't sell the sole right to cover the story. They can do the immediate broadcast rights, but they can't prevent other newspapers from saying, you know, yesterday the Yankees lost to the Red Sox. You can't do that. And they're basically now fighting over the details of whether or not you can do that for baseball statistics or not. It's also going on in England over fantasy football, soccer there. The same kind of situation going on. They end up, but a lot of these statistics and whatever are actually copied verbatim from other news sources. It's something they're kind of dancing around in the actual court case, but that's most of the time where it comes from. Because I guarantee you, there's not every news outlet in the United States that's got a guy sitting in every ballpark in America counting the number of pitches and walks and whatever.